thing that's kind of a bugbear of mine is campaigners and organisations saying they're raising awareness, but not really understanding that just having something shared is not enough to actually raise meaningful awareness. So, hello, I'm Jean O'Brien. I am a digital consultant based in Dublin in Ireland. I work with organisations all over the world remotely on their digital strategy. So I cover digital strategy, campaigning, fundraising, integrated campaigning, that type of thing. I'm also the founder of Digital Charity Lab, which is a social enterprise that builds digital skills in non-profits and campaigns.
So what's the campaign that you wanted to have a look at?
So yeah, after a fair bit of dithering and panicking, I remembered, just struggling to think of a good campaign. I remembered the gender pay gap bot, which was a really excellent Twitter campaign that went out on International Women's Day this year. And it was it was kind of a really smart integration of data, Twitter activism and PR. And I think it was a really, really effective and clever campaign with a really interesting target. So I'd love to talk about that today.
So what did it do right, do you think? Like, what do you think the strategy was behind this gender pay gap bot?
Yeah, so the strategy basically was to challenge organisations that were using International Women's Day as a way to sort of whitewash their brands. So we all know that there's a big problem in the world with corporates kind of hijacking campaigns, right? Hijacking causes and, making a big fuss of themselves around Pride Week, but never doing anything for gay people the rest of the year around, or, and International Women's Day is a great example of that, where organisations will do these sort of very token gestures towards gender equality. And definitely a lot of brands see these big sort of international days of awareness as PR opportunities and will hop on them even if they've actually got nothing to do with their brand. So the great thing about the gender pay gap bot was it basically challenged organisations that were doing that. The way they did it was they took the data that's available through the UK government, which is about... so basically, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, the UK government started doing mandatory reporting on the gender pay gap, and that data is publicly available. So they took that data and linked it up with the organisations that were tweeting. So if a university tweeted out about how they were, honouring all their female employees and they're a fantastic organisation for women, and here's a load of women standing here doing this. This was a thing for some reason. The gender pay gap bot would very simply just retweet what they had said and put above it what their gender pay gap was at their organisation. So it was really smart and really stark and just very, sorry about the talk. It was a really cleverly selected platform. It just wouldn't have worked the same way on Facebook or Instagram with its sort of happy clappy atmosphere, or LinkedIn with its very, pro-corporate atmosphere. So, I really love this campaign. I thought it was just a great integration of take this publicly available data. So it wasn't like they were doing, whistleblowing or investigative journalism or anything. It was just like, this data is out there, but is it actually being looked at? Is it being used? And they used it in a really smart and direct way.
And it was a pretty devastating. It was a pretty devastating single post to have, as you said. Like no editorializing, just the bald fact when quote tweeting what a company has said about itself. What kind of reaction did you see? What kind of impact do you think it had?
I think the impact was immediate and huge. There was a great statement someone said where they said, "I've never seen such mayhem created by a single account on Twitter," which I think is, a really good summary of it. So there's, on the day itself, there was a load of instant reaction. So you saw some brands deleting their tweets and reposting them without the International Women's Day hashtag, which meant that they were just a bit harder to find, which was really funny. Some brands blocked the gender pay gap bot, including a charity, which I think is just really, really poor. Not a great way to handle a comms crisis. Some argued, I know there was one organisation, I think they're like a pub chain in the UK, and they said, well, actually this data isn't fair because we had it covers the pandemic, and we had a lot of people furloughed, and we had this and this and that. But, the gender pay gap there was huge. It was like 75% or something. So it's like, well, even if you feel like the data is not representative how you always are, it's still like a giant pay gap and definitely a problem. And of course, it, potentially opens a lot of can of worms around, well, why were more women furloughed? And, all that kind of stuff. They said like more women were furloughed. It's like, well, why are you furloughing women over men? So anyway, So there was a small amount of pushback from a couple of brands who felt that they weren't being represented, but generally the reaction was to kind of panic essentially and try and cover their tracks. And I think it was really interesting because I've worked in comms, obviously, like yourself. I've worked in comms teams and organizations and been part of sort of crisis comms where you're reacting to something. And I just thought it was really interesting. It was really obviously none of them were prepared for any pushback on this, you know, which again, I think shows how original and smart the campaign was, that they were, you know, people were really taken by surprise by it, which is always great.
And I think the creators of this are on record as saying that they want to be back for 2023. Like, what kind of things do you think? What areas for improvement do you think there might be? Interesting.
I mean, I did think, I suppose the thing that jumped out to me as a campaigner is that there's not really a user journey in this campaign, right? That if you see this, it's all about sharing it and amplifying the message. There's no next logical step for someone who cares about this issue to get involved. I do think that makes sense, though, for the type of campaign that it is, and the fact that it was run by, I think, a social media specialist and a data specialist. They don't have an organization behind them. I don't know. Maybe if there was some place to send people, that would be a great thing to have. But I'm not sure it's that simple, I suppose. And I do think the impact of this campaign was that it was really about pinpointing hypocrisy. Like that was the aim, and they did it really, really well. And I think the fact that the media coverage was so extensive, and reading back over the media coverage, I saw they got some really good points in. Like they managed to get messaging across about what's actually needed to fix the gender pay gap, and saying it's not just about, you know, talking about it. It's that there are steps you could take, like legislative and things around equal maternity and paternity leave. A thing that's kind of a bugbear of mine is campaigners and organizations saying they're raising awareness, but not really understanding that just having something shared is not enough to actually raise meaningful awareness. Like, awareness means someone's read what you've put out, they've understood it, they remember it. So I think this is a really good example of meaningful awareness, where they created a real conversation around it. They forced certain organizations into action on it, as opposed to just being this broad generic message. And the media coverage was excellent. Like, it really was proper. You know, I don't think you could ever ask for better media coverage than they got, because it wasn't just the likes of the Washington Post and, you know, the Daily Mail and these big circulation papers. There's also industry papers talking about it and so going like, what needs to change our industry so this kind of thing doesn't happen again. So yeah, I think that was really, really positive.
Is this the kind of Twitter productive mess that you're going to miss if people's fears are true that Twitter's circling the drain?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like, I am properly addicted to Twitter. Like, you know, I'm going to be one of those people who goes to pieces if and when it falls apart. Yeah, I do think Twitter will be a huge loss. Not just because I'm personally addicted to it, but because I think it is a platform for this type of thing that just is really difficult to do in any other platform. You don't get the same reach to I might say influencers, but I hate the concept of influencers. I mean, opinion makers, you know. So on Twitter, you get journalists, bloggers, you know, pundits, all kinds of people who will engage in the conversation with this and help to bring it to a wider audience, which is very, very difficult to get on the other channels. I do think Twitter is great for activists. I mean, you know, I look at data from a lot of different organizations, and Twitter tends to not drive a whole lot of fundraising or, you know, sometimes not even a whole lot of lead generation. But what it is really good for is activism, and both in the sense of like doing activism and getting a message out there, but also just learning, you know, seeing what's happening, seeing the conversations about something. The conversations there tend to be ahead of the curve. I think particularly for people working in comms in organizations, to know there's an issue coming down the road. People are really sick of PR nonsense about International Women's Day. So we really need to make sure our house is in order if we're going to talk about these issues. So yeah, I think it will be a massive loss if it goes.
Thanks so much, Jean. Is there anything else you want to plug while you're here?
Yeah, so my consultancy website is jeanobrien.com, and that just has the information about my services and the kind of work I do. But more than that, I want to plug Digital Charity Lab, which is basically a resource for the sector. So it's digitalcharitylab.org, and there's lots of free downloads and links to online courses and so on that site. So and I'd love to hear feedback from anyone who's used it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jean. This is fun.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Joe. I really enjoyed doing this.